Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 100 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I'd like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. For those participating by video conference, click on your microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Thank you all for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 108(3) and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, May 23, 2024, the committee resumes its study of innovation science and research in recycling plastics. It's now my pleasure to welcome, as an individual, Dr. Steve Allen, Chief Executive Officer of Healthy Earth by video conference, and also by video conference from the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, Daniel Duguay, Sustainability Specialist. So you will have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Dr. Allen, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I study micro and nanoplastic pollution in the remotest areas of the globe. I show plastic transport through the air, falling into the oceans, ejecting into the air through sea spray. Now, I studied peat bogs that showed microplastics started raining down in the early 1970s and increased ever since, exactly matching plastic production. Now, I find particle numbers grow exponentially the smaller you look. In Canada, I've studied plastic deposition from hurricanes and in seafood. I mention this because all these measurements were made while everyone thought we were recycling. Canadians doing the right thing has little impact on their exposure to plastic, and it makes no difference if it's recycled, landfilled, or incinerated. It's manufactured through to end of life that it leaks, and it's a global problem. That drinking water in front of you contains plastic. Every glass of water on the planet does too. I'm certain if I measured what plastic you're exposed to now, water, food, even the air you breathe, that will be the lowest exposure of the rest of your life. If you manage to mechanically recycle 100% of Canada's waste tomorrow, it would likely only increase that. Now, there's so much plastic in the environment already that it's doubtful your grandchildren will ever enjoy the exposure level you have right now. They're exposed from placental serum to breast milk, and it's rapidly increasing. Now, how much plastic humans can withstand, I don't know. But I worry that by the time we find out, it'll be too late to do anything about it. The plastics industry has had 50 years and almost unlimited budget to develop recycling. They built the plastic, they know the chemistry. If anyone could do it, they could. But as we've seen with Shell's advanced recycling pledge recently, it failed, said it was not feasible, and cited regulatory shifts. Now, mechanical recycling plants themselves are leaky. I studied a new state-of-the-art recycling plant in Scotland where 6% of the plastic that went in was leaking out as microplastics into the river. So recycle 4 million tonnes and release over 200,000 tonnes of microplastic and an unfathomable amount of nanoplastic. That does not even take into account the atmospheric release from recycling, the energy required, or the risk of serving children French fries in recycled plastic that contains any of 16,000 chemicals. The recycling expert witness you had here admitted you're not recycling anything now, you're only downcycling into inferior products. Making building materials out of it just means adding toxic flame retardants, which are already in all of us, PFAS. I'm not saying that we should not look into recycling highly essential items, but I can't see the logic for governments to spend public money to keep this hazardous material in circulation. Waste plastic is not a valuable resource. It's the equivalent of capturing lead to put back into fuel or recycling asbestos into more roofing. It's scientifically, environmentally, human health, climate change, and even economically, it does not make sense to recycle the majority of plastic. There are plenty of good alternatives that will create a true green jobs economy if extracted, produced and reused safely and sustainably. Glass, metal, plant-based materials like areca palm, bamboo, etc. Governments can eliminate the cost to municipalities and consumers in the transition to these better alternatives by diverting a fraction of the subsidies now enjoyed by the plastic industry to safer and more sustainable materials. Now, we're not just dealing with plastic waste here, we're dealing with a global environmental and public health crisis. When you stop asking how much plastic the world can create without killing too many whales, and instead look at how many organisms, including us, can be affected by disintegration of a single plastic bag, then you begin to understand the gravity of the situation. We are involved in an extremely dangerous experiment, and every day lost investing in a profit-driven, short-term techno-fix to save the plastic industry is time wasted. There's no borders in nature. If Canada wants to protect the health of Canadians and the environment, then Canada needs to do more to solve the global problem of plastic pollution right now. In short, you're addressing the wrong end of the plastic life cycle if you want to safeguard the people and the environment. The people who can solve this problem are in this room. You are the people who can regulate the plastic industry, curb production, make Canada a green economy powerhouse, not a pollution enabler. Require disclosure of chemicals used, police the industry, make industry prove it is environmental before being put on the market. Criminalise greenwashing. Fund research into removing plastic from farm to table and
Dr. Allen,
project.
Dr. Allen, that's over time. Okay, so you'll get a chance to finish your remarks, I'm sure, with our questions. I'd now like to turn to our second witness, Mr. Duguay, for 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, committee members, on behalf of the Canadian Produce Marketing Association and Canada's fresh fruit and vegetable industry, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The CPMA is in a unique position as an organization representing companies from the farm gate to the dinner plate, spanning the entire fresh produce industry. CPMA's almost 900 domestic and international members are responsible for 90% of fruit and vegetable sales in Canada. Canadians rely on a highly integrated domestic and global fresh produce supply, which supports Health Canada recommendations for a healthy diet. The fresh produce supply chain moves a wide variety of perishable products over long distances in a way that ensures Canadians have access to safe, high-quality, affordable fruit and vegetables year-round. Packaging, including plastic packaging, is essential to maintaining the availability, quality, and safety of fresh produce from the farm to the fork. The critical role played by packaging can be summed up in two phrases. The first, 95% of what packaging does, it does before it even reaches the consumer. The second, a produce packaging decision is a sustainability decision. Now, what does this mean? They seek to convey that ensuring food safety, minimizing food loss and waste, maximizing supply chain efficiencies, and meeting produce traceability requirements all depend on the shape and composition of the packaging. But here's where the complexity grows. What else depends on the shape and composition of the packaging? The ability to keep the packaging out of landfills and meet the zero plastic waste goals both governments and industry have been pursuing for many years. To ensure the packaging provides the critical functionality and also kept out of landfills and the environment, the industry now designs packaging that meets mission-critical performance that vendors and consumers have come to expect while accounting for the packaging's end of life. The fresh produce industry is a leading adopter of sustainable strategies. These range from lightweighting packaging and innovative elimination, such as edible coatings, to significant reuse volumes for business-to-business packaging. It also has increased the use of packaging, which is both recycle-ready and increasingly recycled. The CPMA launched its packaging working group in 2019, and the fresh produce industry endorsed the Golden Design Rules in 2020, leading to many new designs, eliminating problematic elements, moving from mixed composition to single material, as well as incorporating increased levels of recycled content when that recycled content does not compromise the performance of packaging, such as food contact. Substitution to alternative materials, such as fully recyclable fiber packaging or industrially compostable solutions, are also being adopted where the packaging performance and function is not compromised. These efforts are having an impact. A recent review confirmed that the fresh produce industry's plastic usage in packaging was down 17% since 2019 when measured by the volume of material used per kilogram of food. The diversity of fresh fruits and vegetables, the quintessential apples, oranges, and bananas problem, as we like to call it, means that packaging for one commodity will need to be different from another. For many commodities, there are no viable alternatives today to plastic packaging which would not compromise food safety or increase food waste, cost, or food insecurity. As stated, a key challenge to designing packaging for zero packaging waste is accounting for the end-of-life infrastructure, be it plastics recycling, composting, or other recycling infrastructures. Although today's discussion focuses on plastics, the goal should be to ensure that packaging choices, when combined with waste management systems, keep all packaging waste out of landfills. To do this effectively, the following areas of innovation should be considered. 1, accounting for differing materials. Waste management systems must deal effectively with different types of materials, including, in our case, rigid and flexible forms of plastics and other materials. Serving different downstream applications, recycled content resulting from waste management systems must serve very different needs, such as those requiring food contact versus those who don't, and promoting harmonization. What is rarely recyclable in one area may not be in all others. This lack of harmonization across multiple jurisdictions is one of the leading challenges for effectively designing end of life. To close, comments on a few related points. The CPMA supports extended producer responsibility. However, there is significant concern that the rapid pace of massive cost escalation is unsustainable. This cost should not be borne by producers alone. We need waste reduction targets that are ambitious but achievable and respect the critical functionality that packaging provides. And to tackle this complex system-level problem, we need engagement from multiple federal players working in tandem with industry along with their provincial counterparts. On behalf of the fresh produce industry, thank you for the opportunity to share our comments and welcome any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Duguay. We'll now begin our 6-minute round of questioning, please, and we'll start that off with MP Kitchen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses here today, and appreciate your being here with us and chance to hear your points. We've heard over a number of weeks, and at least in my short time with this committee, from many different organizations and on different aspects, and a lot of Canadians that might be listening today, and when they hear plastic, they hear just plastic. That's the only thing they hear. They don't understand the differences between bioplastics, virgin plastics, etc. Sorry, Mr. Duguay, you mentioned today, and you talked a little bit about in the aspect of packaging and the different types of packaging. You talked, you sort of touched a little bit in different points, and whether that might be virgin plastics, I'm going to throw that at you, or whether that might be biopolymers. These are things that Canadians really don't understand. When, as you mentioned, when they go to that market and they see their bananas wrapped in a plastic, or they see their cantaloupe wrapped in a plastic, or they see whatever it may be, they assume that those plastics are exactly the same. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, in that not all plastics are created equal. Again, in our industry, we rely significantly on a subset of plastic materials. An example is the PET resin that's used commonly in water bottles and other food applications, is used extensively as a rigid plastic for clamshells for produce, notably. There are other forms of plastic that are used, more flexible forms. An example that's pretty critical to our industry is modified atmospheric packaging. It's basically the bags that you see used for salad bags. That's a fairly complex construction that basically controls the environment within the bag to make sure that the food doesn't spoil rapidly and maintains quality. So these are examples where, yes, we do rely on a set of different materials which, from the consumer point of view, may appear to be the same, but are actually quite chemically different.
So now the costs of those plastics, are they quite variable in ranges? Because that's obviously going to add to the cost to the consumer.
I'd say that, yeah, definitely the cost of the more common materials, again, PET being probably, call it the workhorse, is not comparable to, let's say, a more high performance material like the ones you'd see for the modified atmospheric control. So this is an industry that's very cost sensitive. So obviously the choice of material is, cost is a big factor. And how that plays out, for example, is the incorporation of recycled content, where there are definitely cost differences between virgin material and recycled content material in the market, which plays into decisions in terms of how much recycled content can be incorporated. That's an example of where cost plays out.
So has the CPMA actually worked with the plastics industry in helping to focus on their attention as to what they might need or suggestions in any way?
We work fair. I mean, our industry, our members, for example, constitute the growers, the shippers, packers. We have packaging companies. We work very closely. I'd say the relationship is very tight between the packaging companies and the growers, shipper, packers. Where there is, I think, a conversation with those who produce the materials is when those materials need to be modified, again, to achieve certain packaging performance requirements. I'd say that's where the conversations occur. Again, in our space, that could involve things like lightweighting packaging, so making it lighter means, can the material maintain the mechanical performance, even though it's a little lighter, a little thinner. Another is, material that you want to incorporate, again, recycled content. How do you achieve the performance when you start changing the chemistry through the incorporation of recycled content? I'd say that's where those conversations happen between our industry and those who produce the raw materials.
In our presentation that we had just last week, we had heard from the food, health, and consumer producers, and they mentioned that this issue could not be borne by the producers alone. Would you agree with that statement?
I'd say right now, definitely, there's a concern that the cost of EPR systems is increasing at a rate that is not clearly understood how quickly it's going to increase, where those funds are going in terms of improving the state of the overall system. So I would agree with that statement from FHCP. I think it was Michelle who spoke on their behalf, that yes, there are definitely concerns on the part of the produce industry that those costs are going to be increasing at a rate that requires more transparency, for sure.
One of the concerns that we see here at committee is that it seems that everyone's, or here in the House, it always appears that someone's coming to the government and saying they're asking for money. And so it's always asking for government money and government intervention. And oftentimes, as I mentioned last week, ultimately the industry needs to self-regulate itself and also needs to self-sustain itself. And I'm just wondering thoughts from your aspect as to how does the industry self-sustain itself so that it's not always asking the federal government to deal with issues on how we deal with, when we look at the circular agenda, which is to reduce, reuse, recycle, and dispose. How do we do that in such a manner that it's beneficial, or how do you foresee that as a manner that's beneficial for Canadians?
I would share two
So
examples.
excuse me, we're going to have to ask you to submit your answer in writing because we're already well over his time. Thank you. So you can submit that. Thank you. We'll now turn to MP Diab for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome to both of our witnesses. Let me turn my attention to Dr. Allen. Dr. Allen, I'm going to give you a chance to finish your thoughts, but before I do, I just have a bit of a preamble because I heard you, but I heard also this is the last day of witnesses for the study, and we've been meeting now for a number of weeks, and we've heard loud and clear how plastic is affecting our water. You said water, food, air, everything we breathe. So it's environmental and health risks and so on. Even the water that we're drinking, and you also mentioned in your introduction there that it's 50 years, we haven't been able to solve it using plastics. And you were starting to tell us about better alternatives for safer, more sustainable material, both on an environmental and health crisis that we have to solve these problems. I'm going to ask you to start back from the first thing that you were trying to start with on the what are the better alternatives, and what can we do as a federal government. Some of it involved other levels of government, but also more importantly, where does the industry come in, and where do consumers come in? And I'm going to give you the rest of the time that I have to really hash that particular question out for me. I think that would be very helpful coming from you. And also, I think I heard in your introduction, you're coming to us from overseas. So thank you for being here this morning, or this afternoon, I guess.
Yeah, I'm currently in northern Norway. But the question you ask is a very good question, but it would take a week of us sitting down together to nut it out properly. There are alternatives. We always had alternatives. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, there was no plastic. We had refillable bottles. Milk came in a refillable bottle. And, these days we have the ability to move vegetable material as packaging from places like Asia and Africa, India, who can supply disposable vegetable matter instead of using vegetables to make new plastic, which is environmentally, it's almost identical. Okay, bioplastic and virgin oil-based plastic has the same effect in nature. It has the same effect to us. It's been shown to be just as toxic, and biodegradable is the same. Okay, so we're not improving things by moving to these other materials. Toxically and environmentally, it's irresponsible.
So what are the alternatives you were suggesting?
Areca palm, for example, is just palm leaf that falls off the palm naturally, and they press it into the shape of a paper plate. And it's completely compostable. It has no glues, unlike many of the other materials like that. And yeah, glass, metal, things like that we've always used, and we know what they are. We know how to handle them. We know how to recycle them. Now, glass doesn't need to be smashed and reformed into a new bottle. It can be washed. We know how to do that. It's 2024. So I think it's just time that we, gave up the plastic dream. It's becoming a nightmare. I mean, my work, I'm here in the North Arctic, measuring plastic that could have come from Canada. It could have come from South Australia. I don't know. And it's really hard to prove where it came from because there's so much of it. And it really is a depressing job.
So your work, I think we read that you argue that removing plastic waste at the source, and I think you're starting to get into that, is key before it enters the sea. Let's talk a little bit about the sea and the ocean. I come from Nova Scotia, and it's all sea around my province. So how do you can you explain that a little bit further for us?
Okay, well, I actually studied oysters and mussels and lobster from Halifax and around Nova Scotia. And I found plastic in all of them. Sorry. It's we have it everywhere. And when plastic winds up in the sea, it comes back out of the sea into the air. So that's where plastic can leapfrog over borders, over land masses. It can reach up into the free troposphere and travel around the globe in just a couple of weeks. There's no way for plastics, and shipping plastic out to Asia to be recycled is it's crazy. You're just going to get the plastic back in your air and your food. And all it does is set up an illegal waste trade. And we already have a problem with that. I mean, Interpol has a great report on it, and Canada is actually a part of that. Sending waste to Asia, getting a fake certificate back to say that it was recycled. And it becomes part of your recycle quota. That's where I think your 2030 pledge is irresponsible, because it's not going to increase the recycling. All it's going to do is increase the illegal waste trade.
So what else can we do as legislators, I guess? Or what else are you recommending besides sort of what you've already recommended? Is there anything else that we can do?
You need to regulate the industry.
Regulation.
It's
Okay.
you guys have the power. You can do a lot more than I can. All I'm trying to do is clean up the mess. But you guys can actually regulate this and stop it.
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you. We'll now turn to MP Blanchard-Jonca for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to say hello to the witness. My first question for Mr. Allen. We've already heard from several witnesses who have talked about their concerns with respect to biodegradable plastics, and they eliminate toxins during when they biodegrade. Could you please speak further to this?
Mute. Dr. Allen, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, the translation failed. I didn't get any.
Non,
Sorry.
c'est normal, monsieur.
That's normal. Don't worry about it.
Want French, English?
English? Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And you weren't getting. I was hearing.
No.
There was.
I'm not sure what went on there. It says English on it, but I'm not getting a translation.
We're just going to test.
So
Maybe. If it's
I'm
very
sorry.
simple
I'll
French.
start your time again if you could ask the question again, because we were hearing the translation fine here. Okay, we're just doing a test here in the room.
Can you hear the English translation now?
Okay. Are you able to now? They're doing a test for you.
I can hear the voice, yes.
Okay, that's great. MP Blanchard-Jonca, would you start from the top
Oui.
then with your question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't like to repeat myself usually, but it's for a good reason now. So, in theory, I'm able to use either official language. And Mr. Allen, my question is for you. We've heard from several witnesses who have talked about their concerns with respect to biodegradable plastics, which in fact aren't biodegradable and which released microplastics when they degraded. I'd like to hear what you have to say about this. Thank you.
Okay, merci. Yeah, biodegradable plastics, they don't degrade in nature. We've shown that. It's scientifically proven. Basically, you can have a plastic bag in nature for 3 years and it will still function as a plastic bag, so they don't degrade. Chemically, they are just as dangerous as other plastics. And it's actually been shown that some of the biodegradables are more dangerous. Now, they break down into smaller particles, but we don't have sufficient regulation and we don't have sufficient studies yet to show what those tiny particles that they break down into can do to humans and animals. And this is a big problem because most of the studies will stop at, say, 20 micrometers, which is small by most people's standards. But when you start to look at organisms, that's where it becomes food and that can kill an animal. So the difference between time between being 20 micrometers and being 1 nanometer is unknown through most of these plastics. And the industry is not interested in looking at it. This is something that the government really needs to step up on and actually make sure that these plastics degrade properly. Not just, we can't see it anymore, which is the ISO definition is, we can't see it, therefore it's gone, which is the definition of putting your head in the sand, right? I mean, we know the plastic's there. I know it because it's part of my research. So I'd like to see the Canadian government regulate this, ask the scientists, and regulate what the scientists tell you you need to look at and not what industry says.
Merci, M. Allen. Écoutez,
Thank you, Mr. Allen. According to credible independent sources, the plastic viewed as a toxic substance under Canadian legislation because scientific literature has proven this to be the case. I'd like to hear what you have to say about this because there are people who doubt this scientific study. Can plastic, in fact, be toxic?
Absolutely. It's absolutely a toxic material. And we've shown this. There are thousands of studies on all sorts of biota, small creatures that have shown that this is toxic. And Karen Wersig even pointed out to you that it was recently found in human heart plaque. Now, they're not saying that there's an actual causation here, but what they're saying is it shouldn't be there. Now, it doesn't take much of a genius to work out that if you put a small particle into a brain, it can cause damage. Any particle. I mean, we're talking about PM10 and PM2.5, the same as carbon pollution that we know is killing 8 million people a year. Well, plastics is in a similar size range and can carry chemicals that it comes into contact with and chemicals that are in the plastic. We're not talking about the nice safe ones. We're talking about legacy plastics with BPA, things like that.
Monsieur Allen, basé sur la science, là,
Based on science, the studies that you're aware of, is it a good idea for a bill that proposes the complete abolition of regulatory measures to take action on plastics and single-use plastics? Because that's what's on the table right here, a bill that was tabled or debated recently that goes against what we're hearing. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about this. Is this a good thing or not?
As a scientist, as a human being, a citizen of Earth, it's insanity. You cannot, the industry has proved that they cannot self-regulate. They lied to us about recycling for the last 50 years and saying, no, it's okay, we've got a fix. They lied. It doesn't work. It's been proven that it's more dangerous to try to recycle it than it is to bury it. The material needs to stop. We need to make regulations. The government needs to do this. And we need to stop greenwashing that we think there's a way to do this. It's not going to happen anytime soon. It doesn't matter if it's enzymes, bacteria, fungus, or insects that they try to get to make it work. None of them ever make it to scalable stage. It doesn't work.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Allen. Écoutez, je pense que ça...
Thank you, Mr. Allen. This reassures me. I have confidence. I trust science. And I know that there are interests of big corporations that have the economy as their perspective. But you're talking about science and research, and I understand that there are people like you who have expertise not just based on ideology, but based on interests, but based on knowledge. So, Mr. Allen, in the time that I have left, I'd like to hear about the toxicity when we talk about plastic degradation. What's the impact for the environment and human health? What should the government be doing to protect these two issues?
I'd love to say we could just get the money hose out and fix this problem. And a lot of it can be done with that. And I don't think the problem is educating the public. I think the problem is educating the government and trying to get them back on track, all right? Because your job in the government is to look after the people in the environment, right? Well, now's your chance.
New pipeline. Oui.
Yeah, new pipeline.
New
yeah.
pipeline. Oui, bon, ben, Monsieur Allen, vous m'enlevez les mots.
Mr. Allen, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. Is it a good idea to spend money on?
So now we'll turn to Mr. MP Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you for both witnesses here today. And I'm going to continue with Dr. Allen. You have put forward a pretty compelling case for the dangers of plastics. And you mentioned, any number of alternatives. We are trying to cut down our plastics, obviously, in the environment. And I'm just wondering if there is alternatives for everything that we use plastics for now. Are there alternatives available?
No, absolutely not. I mean, medical science today would not be a tenth of what it was. I mean, you can't have that. Plastic has a place. We all know it. And there's some very good plastics, very good materials that do specific jobs better than anything else we've got at the moment. We need those. The rest of it, like plastic packaging, I mean, half of the plastic issue is single-use package. Now, walk into any supermarket, and I guarantee you that when you look down that aisle, 95% of the products on that shelf have got some sort of plastic packaging or PFAs on them. All right. Now, you know, and I know that less than 10%, right, of that packaging on that shelf in every supermarket aisle, in every supermarket in the country, it's all going to landfill. It's not being recycled.
So I can see alternatives for most of that packaging. What would you say, for instance, to Mr. Duguay? Maybe I'll ask him if I have time, but how do we replace, say, film on, perishable vegetables? Or is that something that we should just go back perhaps to when you and I were young and we didn't have that? Are there trade-offs that we have to make there?
I say we need to go back and look at the logistics. Logistics currently is that the fruit and vegetable get put into plastic and shipped a very long way. And the plastic helps it makes it look good until it gets in your fridge where it starts to go off quickly. I think we just need to redesign the farm to fork system to using big containers, perhaps. I don't know. Logistics isn't my field of expertise, but there has to be a way that we can remove the plastic from the entire system, or at least minimize it. I mean, there's plastic trays that you buy and the fruit comes wrapped in plastic film with a foam tray underneath. I mean, I never asked for my fruit and veg to look like that. I never asked for plastic to be on my cucumbers, but it's there. It got pushed on the public. We didn't ask for it. All it was to increase the profits of the supermarket by making food last or look better for a little bit longer. And I think government could step in here and start to fund some research into this. Industry should be looking at it. We should be regulating them.
And you've also made the case for not recycling plastics. It just makes more plastic that causes the environmental issues that you're concerned with. What should we be doing with the plastic that's in our environment now, in our world? Even if all countries tomorrow, created these alternatives and we all went cold turkey off plastics, what should we be doing with the plastics in our environment right now?
Unfortunately, there is no safe way to store this material. If you put it in the landfills, it leaches out as microplastics. If you incinerate it, you get chemicals into the air and some microplastics if it's not done correctly. There's no safe way to do this, but I think for the moment, until we find something, we should be landfilling, but that's a temporary fix. And we should be sorting the plastic that we put into landfills so that we can recover it easily. So we know we've got that type of plastic stored here. We can go back and get it later when we can do something safe with it. But safe is, we can't let industry decide what that word means. The Plastics Treaty, for example, is something that scientists need to be listened to a bit more.
So just quickly, I think you said something like we could find alternatives for about 90% of the plastic we're using today, and that 10% is things that we couldn't replace. Is that about right? If we went to completely other materials?
I wouldn't put a number on it just yet. There's too many different fields and too many applications for me to say precisely how much. But yeah, I'm absolutely certain that the vast majority of plastics don't need to even exist in the first place. It was just cheap and profitable to make it. I mean, we didn't have it when we were young. We survived. I'm sure we could go back to it.
Okay, 29 seconds. I think I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
I'm sorry. Are you finished, Mr. Kenning? Is that what you said? Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay, we'll now turn to our second round. We'll start that off with MP Tucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Chair witnesses. Changing gears a little bit to the reality on the ground. Last Friday, I was at the food terminal in Toronto, and it's one of, I believe, 5 terminals in North America for produce and other food goods coming into Canada. Very interesting tour and meet a lot of different people from that area, from working in that area. To Mr. Duguay, could you outline a little bit about, in more detail, how much faster various types of produce will spoil without the use of plastic packaging?
It's a great question because it depends on the produce and it depends on how far it's coming from. So again, part of our challenge is that we are trying to maximize and meet more so the expectations the consumers and citizens have in this country of having access to fresh produce year round. And what that means is at certain times of the year, the produce travels a couple 100 kilometers and travels in a package that maintains that quality and that food safety over that relatively short period of time. In the fall, the winter, the spring, the expectation is still there, and that produce travels from California or from Mexico. And the risks become that when it's traveling that much further, again, in some cases refrigerated, in some cases not, the wrong form of packaging can basically make it that the produce won't survive the trip at all. Or you'll lose significant portions of it, what we call shrink in the industry. We'll lose a significant portion of it by the time it makes it to the depot. And so that percentage can be as high as, could be as high as double digits, 50, 60 more percent, if you're talking about fundamentally the wrong package. I say that's not what the industry as a result uses, because really what it's trying to do is maximize the amount of food that survives the trip and maintains the quality, remains safe, so that it can be distributed and ultimately consumed, because that's ultimately what we're in the business of doing, is getting food. So sorry, that's maybe not as direct an answer, but the wrong packaging could pretty well prevent that supply chain from fundamentally working. And that's the balancing act that the industry faces every day.
And you brought up shrinkage. What would that do to the price of food then?
Well, fundamentally, the price of food is linked to how much you pay and basically how much you can put on the shelf. And hence, when you look at something like bulk produce versus packaged, that's a challenge because there's a different level of loss when something is sold in bulk versus sold in packaged. And stores make decisions, retailers make decisions based on consumer preferences and consumption patterns, et cetera. So the challenge is that if you have produce that has significant shrink, let's say in transit from the farm to the depot, that has to be reflected in the cost, because ultimately, the grower gets paid X and then you're trying to sell that amount. So right now you'll see shrink levels in single digits, depending on, again, the commodity type and the time of year. And if those shrink levels increase, then you could almost say proportionally, you're going to see price increases. So when we looked at the impact of this, let's say, significant reduction in plastic packaging for produce, and I say significant, effectively a ban of plastic packaging for produce last year, we saw potential for cost increases of over 30%. So that's the sort of the order of magnitude.
And we're in a cost of living crisis right now. Everyone is talking about how expensive food is. To the CPMA, have heard those concerns, I'm assuming, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what would be a solution? Like right now, we're heading towards a path or down a path that if this Liberal government gets its way, there'll be no plastic available. So food costs are going to grow, resulting in more poverty out there. I'm more worried about the food bank usage. And right now we know there's a couple million Ontarians needing to rely on the food bank. It's going to grow that much higher. Just on the food bank aspect, do you guys work with the local food banks to like real world solutions to feed people, and maybe some of the extra produce or some of the shrinkage that isn't bad, does it end up at the food bank hopefully?
There's a very strong working relationship between retailers, produce that's basically not sold but still consumable, a very different challenge, of course, than produce that spoils, that's not consumable. So that's efforts that we work on. And in fact, there's a study coming out next month that will actually speak to the opportunities to improve that.
Thank you so much for your testimony for the people that like to eat 3 meals a day.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So now we're going to turn to MP Callaway for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. Dr. Allen, I want to thank you for a very candid testimony. Very few times do you hear the words from you in your testimony, global environmental health crisis. And I think that is a pretty profound statement. And I think it's a pretty profound moment. When I first came to this committee, and I heard that we were studying plastics, I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. And I've learned quite a lot from a variety of witnesses, including yourself today. And there's a couple of things. So I mentioned the global environmental crisis. I want to go there, and then I want to go towards the end of your testimony when you talked about how do we solve the problem. I'm wondering if you can, just unpack just briefly, because I want to come back with another question for you, just on the health outcomes as it relates to microplastics, or as you put it, most, if not all, plastics. I'm wondering if you could just break down for people, because I do think, although it is government and legislatures to have a serious conversation and not use political talking points to move the ball forward, to make sure everyone is safe and secure, which is a fundamental right of every parliamentarian. Can you give us a sense of what this causes in individuals and a little bit of detail, and then I will come back with a second question.
Okay, thank you. Let me give you a little scenario of they use plastics for drug delivery, and it's a very specific design and shape because it can pass through blood-brain barriers. It can pass through any part of the body because it's so spiky that the body can't see it. Okay, it doesn't generate the immune response. But when you look at microplastics under the microscope, you find it's the same shape. That's why it can move in and out of our bodies quite easily. And they've done studies on scallops and things where they showed when they fed it micro and nanoplastics, within a few hours, it was in every part of the animal. Now, currently, if you have a look at what can pass into the blood through the gut, it can be up to 150 micron, which is quite big. Okay, but nanoplastics, and I do a lot of work with nanoplastics, there's nothing to stop them going everywhere in the body. Now, it contains an endocrine disrupting chemical. Okay, it can absorb DDT, all the other chemicals that we prefer to forget about. It can stick to those nanoplastics. Now, imagine what that could do to a developing baby's pituitary gland. If you had enough of those particles lodged in that gland, what could that do to the development of a human? What could it do to the development of any creature on the planet? I mean, we talk about blocking up the guts of worms because their mouth is bigger than their anus, so they normally take a whole particle in, digest it, and then release it. But plastics block them up, so they're full forever until they die of starvation. Now, my research is in remote areas, and I'm looking at that because these are our reserves for all that biota that keeps the world working. Now, we're flooding it with so much atmospheric plastic falling onto the ground there in hurricanes in Newfoundland, for example. At the peak season when everything's growing, everything's feeding, we're suddenly feeding it tons, literal tons of plastic particles at the exact size that they want to eat. And they smell like food. They release pheromones like the EDCs. All these chemicals, they look like food. Now, we've had it in breast milk, placental serum, it's in testes, it was in baby's first poo, it's in every part of the human body already, and it's a foreign object. We have not developed any resistance to this material. I mean, we only got nanomaterials at all when we started smelting metals. Thankfully, they were mostly inert except for lead, which we know does bad things to us, right? So plastics have no place in our lives. Very soon, we're going to know just how bad this is.
Thank you for that. How much time do I have left?
19 seconds.
19 seconds. So one of the pieces in your opening statement, I believe, or one of the testimony interactions, you talked about government needs to play the role and to regulate. And I appreciate that very much. But I also know that there's a tendency for agendas to get hijacked, an ostrich approach to dealing with a fundamental problem. You talked about 8 million people dying because of carbon emissions. Sometimes you wouldn't know that in this place. How do we work with? How do we, like you mentioned, educating is a part of it, but not all of it. But I do believe we need to educate the public on the seriousness of the things you just brought up.
Yeah, well, that's the government's job, but the government needs to know it first.
Excuse me, Dr. Allen, you can submit that in writing unless another questioner here takes it up. Sorry. So now we will turn to MP Blanchard-Joca for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais poursuivre.
Thank you. I agree with you. The government has a major responsibility for protecting the environment. You know, we've gone from education, now we have to focus on action. We all understand what's at stake. You know that the government had promised back in 2019 to ban certain plastics. But in 2020, they had sanctions to make companies more responsible, accountable, those that manufacture plastic. There's a whole issue of recycling. 2021, they exclude the pandemic struck, and we couldn't do anything. But when it came to subsidizing gas and oil sectors to help us get through this economic crisis, well, they could take action then, but not with respect to the regulations on plastic. So now we have some regulations, partial regulations that deal with certain plastics, and it won't come into place till 2025. So it's after an election. So I'd like you to tell us, do you think that the action taken by the government is really going to change anything, have anything to do, and will have an impact on the recycling of plastics?
Honestly, any step forward is a good step, but the report card is obviously must try harder. Sorry, guys. I'm quite disappointed at the Canadian government's approach to this, when their main function here is to protect the environment and the people of Canada. And what I'm seeing is people defending the plastics. And I really don't understand it. I thought your job was the environment and the people. I'd love to sit down with all you MPs in a room and have you explain to me exactly why you think that way. Because as a scientist, I can see the reality of the situation. There's no ideology. I don't have a cross to bear. I don't have anything like that. I'm just telling you what's wrong with the planet and what's wrong with what you're planning to do. And I think it's irresponsible to try to recycle now. We don't have the technology. We don't have the infrastructure.
C'est très clair, Monsieur Allen. J'espère que les gens qui prennent les décisions.
I hope that the decision makers are listening to us and going to understand how they need to take future decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we will turn to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to stay on with Dr. Allen. I know you've studied the issue of plastic pollution around the world, in Asia, etc. We've all heard of the big blobs of plastic pollution in jars out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I know when I've gone to island nations such as Samoa, they're facing a huge problem of tons of plastic washing up on their shores. I'm a bird biologist. A friend of mine was studying the albatross nesting on Midway Island, out literally in the middle of the Pacific. Those albatross feed on the coasts of British Columbia, bring food from there to their young in Midway, and had sights of a young albatross coughing up a toothbrush. These are, I just wonder if you could comment on the worldwide scale of this problem and how all that pollution from around the world, all that plastic, affects us here in Canada and everywhere.
Yeah, there's no borders in nature. So there's between 12 and 20 million tons being pushed into the ocean every year. That's got to go somewhere. Now, when plastic breaks up in the ocean, whether it's through rubbing on the sand on the beach or UV and the salt, it can come back out of the air. So it doesn't matter where that plastic went in, you can be breathing it in Canada and anywhere else on the planet. My research is up in the free troposphere as well, which is above the clouds. And that's the superhighway for plastic. It's a superhighway for all chemicals. So plastic can go around the world in 2 weeks. So shipping your plastic away, there's no away for plastic. There's no, I will just send it to Asia because they can recycle it. It doesn't get recycled. It gets burnt. It gets pushed into the river. And there's ample proof of that. Read the Interpol reports, please. I recommend everyone does. Now, my current research is I'm currently researching plastics up here in the Arctic, but my NGO is tackling plastic waste going into the river in Asia as a start, because the majority of plastics in the oceans came through Asia because Western countries thought Asia was a good place to dump their waste. And they
Thank you.
didn't have any way to recycle it.
So I want to thank Dr. Allen and Daniel Duguay for your testimonies and participation in the committee study. If you have further testimonies you'd like to submit in writing, you may do so with the clerk. So we're now going to suspend briefly and get ready for a second panel. Start it again, please. So for those of you participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. It's now my pleasure to welcome from the Council of the Great Lakes Region, Mark Fisher, President and Chief Executive Officer. From Selkirk College, Jason Taylor, the Department Head of Selkirk Technology Access Center by video conference, and Marina Pietrasel from Sustainable Strat Inc., Principal of Sustainable Development and Compliance. So welcome to all three of you. Up to 5 minutes will be given for our opening remarks, after which we'll proceed with rounds of questions. Mr. Fisher, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, honorable members of the Science and Research Committee, for the opportunity to speak to you today as part of your plastics recycling study. Formed in 2013, the Council of the Great Lakes Region, or CEGLR, works across the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, as well as 8 states in the U.S. from New York to Minnesota. Our mission is to bring the region's diverse perspectives and interests together across borders and sectors to accelerate the transition to a sustainable future. What does this mean in practice? For CEGLR, it means advocating for supportive policies, business strategies, innovations, and the public-private sector investments that will ensure the region's economy, which is North America's industrial engine, is growing responsibly, all of the region's people are thriving, and the Great Lakes, the largest freshwater system in the world, is protected for future generations. If we're successful, our aim is to create the first sustainable region in the world. A significant challenge that the region is facing today is how we sustainably manage the materials we use as consumers and as industries, and to reduce waste, especially plastics. Why is this a challenge? Research, as well as data from the Great Lakes Plastics Cleanup, which CEGLR runs with Pollution Probe, shows that 80% of the pollution washing up on the shoreline is plastic in the form of litter, or sometimes the accidental release of pellets used in plastics manufacturing. In addition, studies including by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Recycling Partnership in the U.S. indicate that over 80% of the valuable plastics we use as consumers are ending up in landfill. CEGLR's own research estimates, based on landfill audit data, that we are throwing out roughly 12 million imperial tons of valuable plastics worth over 2 billion Canadian dollars every year in our garbage. As a result, CEGLR launched Circular Great Lakes and released a 5-year action plan in 2022 to mobilize stakeholders and sectors to forge a future without plastic waste and pollution. Pertinent to this committee's work, the action plan focuses on driving projects and change in 6 key areas where we see critical gaps, notably for consumer plastics. First, the collection of plastics such as curbside and drop-off programs, the technological advancements required in our recycling infrastructure, such as mechanical recycling, secondary sortation, and new chemical recycling solutions to expand the sortation and processing of plastics. The development of competitive, more diverse end markets for a wider range of plastic materials, the need to inform consumer behaviors through increased education and engagement, the policies required to enable sustainable materials management practices, and lastly, the investments required by government and business to support and accelerate the development of new infrastructure and packaging solutions that are more sustainable and recyclable. By facilitating projects in these areas with many partners, we want to help facilitate the achievement of a 50% recycling rate in the region by 2030. This is consistent with the zero plastic waste strategy adopted by CCME, as well as the national recycling strategy put forward by the US EPA. From a resource recovery and recycling standpoint, a key aspect of a circular economy, this will require the ability to divert an additional 3 million tons of plastics away from landfills annually, roughly 2.7 metric tons, Canadian figures. Given that we are currently recycling on average about 9% of consumer plastics in Canada and the United States, Achieving a 50% recycling rate will be no small effort, but it can be done. A circular economy by design, but achieving a 50% recycling rate for consumer products does not equal a circular economy. A circular economy by design is achieved when we can eliminate material waste and pollution, circulate products in the economy at their highest value, and regenerate nature. Therefore, in considering innovation, science, and research in recycling plastics, or more importantly, achieving a circular economy, I encourage you to consider the following. First, new legislation and regulatory certainty are certainly needed to enable the economic and societal change necessary to transition to a circular economy. Ensuring each level of government is doing their part and are aligned will be crucial with respect to the standards, regulations, and targets that will catalyze circularity, such as extended producer responsibility, recycled content, recycling rates, labeling. Second, in considering source reduction measures or product alternatives, you must remember that all products have an environmental impact, and in many applications, plastics today continue to be the best option for a variety of reasons. Adopting a life cycle approach will be vital for evaluating the trade-offs between the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of different materials in circular approaches. Third, other countries such as the United States are investing heavily in material science and new manufacturing processes, creating the conditions for new industries and products to be developed and deployed at scale. The Government of Canada must do the same and more through its research granting councils and investments in small businesses and industry-driven R&D if Canada is to have a significant presence in the green economy. Fourth, we will not be able to recover all of the materials from consumers and the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector, not just households, if we rely solely on mechanical recycling solutions or traditional recycling. Permitting or creating the legal framework for the development and use of new and emerging sortation approaches or other material processing methods like chemical recycling is strongly encouraged. Lastly, consumer education and behavior change will play an important role in reducing waste, increasing recycling, and ultimately achieving a circular economy. Therefore, we must ensure that the practices we are asking consumers to adopt today are easy to understand, are affordable, and easy to access. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd be pleased to take your questions.
To Jason Taylor for an opening statement of 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before the committee. As a department head and researcher at the Selkirk Technology Access Center here in the Kootenay region of British Columbia, we have really focused on supporting industry community in our learning region through research and development and training in advanced manufacturing and advanced computing. Since 2020, the STAC has been fortunate enough to work with some amazing industry and community partners throughout our region and to foster circular economy practices and advance both educational and research in plastics recycling and reuse. Here, I also wanted to share a few of the examples of projects we've been working on. Start with KC Recycling. So KC Recycling is here in Trail, BC, and they recycle car batteries as one of their outputs or business models. They recycle polypropylene from car batteries in the amount of 200 tons per month and are looking to double and possibly even triple that into the future. 100% of this plastic is currently being then packaged and shipped in pellet form across North America to go back into batteries or other like automotive industry plastics. The research we've been working on with KC Recycling directly has been to use these pallets as something else. So we've been successfully been able to use it as a feedstock for 3D printing and injection molding. We've also been looking at other opportunities locally, and that's the key here is instead of having this material shipped here, processed, and then shipped back out across the world, we're looking at what can we use this plastic for locally in the industries that we support, like mining, hydroelectric power generation, forestry, and of course, mass timber. Another key partner of this partnership and most partnerships that we've been working with here at the STAC is the partnership and involvement with students. So we have a program here called the Digital Fabrication and Design Program. And a key opportunity in that program is to teach about sustainability, about design for reuse, and possibly even elimination of plastics in some cases. Another partner we've been working with is Tempus 3D, and Tempus is an industrial 3D printing company. And the industrial process that they use is a powdered material called PA12. And out of each cycle of the print, there is about maybe 5 to 20% of waste of plastic that cannot be recycled in its own system. So what we've been looking at is opportunities to print that waste. And one way is we just purchased a printer that will print that machine's waste for industrial level 3D printed objects and materials. Another great partner that we work with is the Kootenay Outdoor Recreation Enterprise. The Corps has started a new program called the Corps Rehub, and it's all around outdoor gear recycling or circularity. So you've bought a part, or you have a ski boot and a part breaks on it, and you find out after 2 years of owning that ski boot that manufacturer does not make that part anymore, and you can't buy it. So what happens to that product? Oftentimes it gets thrown into the garbage, and you have to go buy a new one. The industry loves that, but we don't. So we've been looking at supporting both through education and actually producing parts for outdoor gear to help that circularity and keep, repair, or reuse those parts in other ways. The primary key to all of these partnerships is, one, research, but also embedding the circular economy principles and techniques into our curriculum. We've started with our digital fabrication and design program. It will be introduced to our engineering program and many others as a core direction that we would really like to introduce into all curriculum thought processes at the college here. The environmental and economic benefits these practices will introduce when students are designing for the next big company will be key, we believe.
That's the end of your time. Excuse me for your opening statement, but perhaps you can cover your rest of your comments through the questions. We will now turn to Marina Pietrosel for an opening statement of 5 minutes, please.
Oui, bonjour, Marina Pietrosel.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Pietrosel. I'd like to talk about my experiences, and I'd like to wind up on a positive note. My experience is really in food services. I've worked in this sector for over 10 years. I've worked in recycling for 10 years, and I was in charge of a program for each province in Canada. So I have on the ground experience, less scientific, if you like, compared to others, but less scientific, but scientific because we do a lot of studies on recyclability of materials. Today we're talking about plastics. When we back in 2021, the Canadian Environmental Agency came up with some guidelines as to how to recycle products with respect to packaging. And this was never done, but however, the jurisdiction, agri-food and sector is provincial, meaning that the federal can't really assist. However, there are some issues that need to be dealt with in Quebec and Ontario and in other provinces. We all have accountability programs, Plastics, in particular, is a material that that really plays a role in food products. If a package has to conserve and protect food, it has to be done properly. Therefore, the packaging counts for 5% of the waste material that comes from the poor conservation. That represents, and this all ends up in the landfill. So we have to work with packaging producers to have better products. I've been a consultant for 10 years, and I've worked with the private sector in order to change packaging that winds up in the environment, to come up with recyclable packaging with the new regulations in Quebec, since have been enforced since 2022. There has been a recycling rate that is quite high. So people that, manufacturers that come up with packaging have to pay for the system, but they are also obliged to recycle all containers for up to 85%. That's a lot. But what I see what I see is that we need to work with the whole value chain, from the manufacturer to the producer to the processor and the retailer. We can't work alone. Everybody has to be sitting at the table for the system to work well. The producers of the plastics, we're talking about plastics today, but they have to be responsible what's put out there on the market and what they sell to the processor and to the right up to the retailer who sells the product. This partnership, this needs to be looked at. However, the producer will pay, they're going to have to pay millions of dollars for this. So everybody has to work together.
Comments. We'll now turn to our first round of questioning. So please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. So first in line, we will start off with MP Pearson for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. Fisher, I was intrigued by your testimony here. Just around how does your organization deal with the microplastics that the Great Lakes would interact with? Do you measure that far down? Do you have opinions about that? Just interested in that, in your opinion.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So through our Great Lakes Plastics Cleanup Today, again, which we run with Pollution Probe, one of Canada's oldest environmental charities, we have a series of innovative capture and cleanup technologies that we operate in Ontario and across a number of states. And working with local partners, we are collecting debris on beaches. We are collecting debris in our waterways, particularly our marinas, to really characterize what we're finding. And it's plastic. It's smaller, typically smaller plastic, so cigarette butts predominantly, but also broken down food and beverage materials that have been in the environment for a long, long time. And then by collecting that and understanding the types and the sizes, we tried to work to understand different sources and pathways. How did it end up there? And it is predominantly public litter. I will say that. And so that data is extremely helpful in having conversations with decision makers like yourselves in terms of how do we stop that from a policy standpoint, but also how do we engage with coastal communities to let them know the impact that that type of behavior and that activity is having on our environment and having on our Great Lakes. And there's certainly a lot of research, more research happening in the Great Lakes today through our higher education institutions about the scale and scope of microplastics, microfibers in the Great Lakes. And as in a previous testimony, really trying to understand the environmental and human health impacts of that material when it does find its way into, let's say, drinking water or into wildlife.
Okay. But you're not trying to recover microplastics or anything like that?
We'll recover it as much as we can through our capture and cleanup technologies. But once it's in our water, the Great Lakes themselves, it's extremely difficult to capture microplastics effectively.
Okay. You're not doing any work on the nanoparticles or anything like that?
No, I would say most of that research is being done by our higher education institutions at this time.
Okay. Okay. From Sustainable Strat, just in terms of, are you doing any research or do you have opinions around how do we divert from using plastic? Is like, do you have an idea? Like we keep hearing that like the medical and the research world can't do without plastic, but some of the other like containers and things like that, we heard just earlier. We just heard about a bamboo, or I think it was a bamboo or a palm leaf that could be used as a disposable plate and things like that. Do you have any other examples of maybe like where we can return from using something that we use plastic exclusively today, return back to something that isn't plastic?
Dans le travail que je fais directement,
in the work that I've been doing with businesses, my clients, we're looking at the materials.
What's that? I got it on the right channel. No, I just
Turn your mic off.
Can you speak again, please, and we'll see if you can hear.
And the work that I've been doing with businesses, manufacturers, retailers, and producers, we're trying for many years now, because of with the fact that we have a high recycling rate, we've started working on eco-design, on the loading material, and we look at materials as well. So we've really looked at the biodegradable sector, because that doesn't really exist. Nothing's biodegradable. We look at all the materials, bamboo, palm leaves. We're not going there. The conservation function, regardless of what products are involved, we don't have a justification or proof that the bamboo or palm leaves or whatever can really preserve food the way that other products can. The preservation is very important, but we're not there yet. I've done a lot of tests with respect to composting, recycling, and various ways of using new materials. To date, it's not something we can use.
Great. From the Selkirk, or what is STAC, that's kind of a neat acronym there. Just around the synergies that you've been developing in your region, how scalable is what you're doing there? Is it something that you would say should be repeated somewhere like across the country, or is it pretty unique and you just got to stick to building out what you got going there right now?
This is a long-term project for us, but we definitely would love to see this scaled out. And I think that's a beautiful part of being in the TAC network, the Technology Access Network. There's 67 of us across Canada, so this could be easily repeated in other advanced manufacturing TACs. The core initiative, the Kootenay Outdoor Recreation Enterprise Initiative, they're actually started a conference today in Kimberley for the next couple days that the recycling and circular economy is definitely a big part of that, because so much of the parts for mountain bikes or ski boots or whatever are plastic, and what happens when they've past their usability. So that's definitely a huge opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now turn to MP Chen for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question first is to Mr. Taylor. I know you were speaking earlier and ran out of time, so I'd like to give you the opportunity to finish your testimony.
Right. So one of the other organizations I'd like to mention is in this region is the Lower Columbia Initiative Corporation. So they have worked with a group of us to really promote circular economy opportunities in this region and elsewhere. The LCIC first in the Metal Tech Alley, and then of course the circular economy opportunities has really, brought together, given us a vision or a hope to, again, promote industry collaboration with education and research and the community. So it's been a great opportunity.
Organization STAC is engaging with organizations that are both small and large, creating awareness and educating on the circular economy. Why is it important to work with not just large industry players, but also small and medium-sized enterprises?
If these small companies start proper, like if they start utilizing or thinking about circularity or design for reuse or design for alternatives to utilizing plastic or utilizing a plastic that is recyclable or comes from a better source than just virgin material, it's we hope that during the design process or initial startup, it uses the right techniques.
I was very intrigued to hear your example about recycling car batteries, repurposing that recycled plastic into pellets and shipping it for reuse in car batteries across the country. But you did mention the importance of developing more local partnerships. Could you share with us why is it important to create circular economies that are localized?
If I don't have to ship, or KC Recycling or any company has to ship a product across the world, shipping is a major consumption and producer of greenhouse gases, of course. If we can make what we need here, reducing the need for shipping or bringing everything from another country, that gives us the power to be sustainable for sure. A pallet is a perfect example. If we don't need to have a product shipped from here to another somewhere else on a pallet that is made of plastic that we've bought from somewhere else, if we can make that pallet here and ship it out, and that pallet is made from car batteries or recycled polypropylene from car batteries. And there's so many other examples of those types of opportunities, not just with car battery plastics, but with any other type of plastic that fits into that recyclability framework.
It sounds like you're certainly creating models that can be used in other parts of the country. And another area you touched on was the work that you're doing with students in education in ensuring that the concept of circular economy is embedded in different areas of curriculum. Could you give examples of your work in this project and how you hope to transform the future thinkers and innovators of the emerging economies ahead?
Mm-hmm. So before I became the department head of the TAC here, I developed this program, the Digital Fabrication and Design program. And a key component of that, or a key hope, was when we designed the curriculum, that every piece of the curriculum has the thought process of why. What material? Is there a better material? Is there something that we can think about, design for reuse, design for recycling or recirculation? Is the manufacturing processes is as well? Is it clean? What are we doing with the waste? All of those types of things. And I think that that core concept is a really cool opportunity to be able to share and export to other opportunities or other educational institutions.
Yep, you've still got a minute.
That's wonderful to hear. Could you give some examples of some projects that your students have worked on that you're aware of, which can demonstrate how circular economy can be understood and applied to solve existing problems that society is faced with?
Yeah, so a student that I recently hired, he's now an employee of the college. Because of his work as a student, his capstone was to develop the extrusion process on our very large 3D printer that we built here at the Stack. And this extrusion process basically takes the pellets from KC Recycling and uses it, extrudes it in the 3D printing process. This printer that we built here is, the build volume is 4 feet by 3 feet by 6 feet tall. And it allows us to make very large parts from fully recycled car battery parts. This, using other plastics to generate that, we would have to buy virgin material and then print the part for. This would be used for making molds for, you know, any other type of manufacturing process.
To MP Blanc-Jonca for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses who are here for this second hour of our meeting, and I'd like to thank Mrs. Pietrusel for being here today. She had less than 24 hours to notice to come here, so I think it should be pointed out. I'd also like to congratulate you on your engagement and your expertise in environmental matters. 30 years of experience. I said more than 25 years. But 30 years, it's better than 25. With your experience, I'd like you to talk to us about what you see out on the ground. We see that decisions are made by governments. We want to eliminate certain uses of certain materials, particularly when it comes to plastics. I'm trying to understand, from your stance, should we base ourselves on science when we make decisions rather than trying to come out and ban certain subjects? Indeed, that's a very good question, Mr. Jonca. I'll give you an example. Today, I'm working with one business in particular that uses various plastic films. They're films that are very simple, and there's no other resin involved. But they also used something that had multi-layers to it. So it's like a sandwich made of polypropylene and other products in order to preserve products. We managed to come up in Quebec. We managed to come up with a product that has the same properties to preserve food in particular, and it also is better for health. We're always working on recyclable products, and one thing that is really important is to do testing. When I talk about tests, I'm talking about scientific testing. There are tests that we do in situ to determine whether it works. Does it have the same resin as another product that's recyclable? Yes. Secondly, we do laboratory testing with a new packaging that we've come up with using single products. Will this new type of packaging, does it do the same thing that the former type of packaging used to do? So this is a scientific test with people working in research centers. So we ensure that the consumer and the life shelf is appropriate. Secondly, we test with producers. You know that today there's packaging that's used, and most of the packaging made with resin come from Asia and India, whereas we have the best material here to do this. Yes, it may be less costly because, but in the long term, it's better to have recyclable material that we produce here, such as CCM. We need to do the same thing here and have targets. California has set targets, 20%, 30% of all their packaging products. Colorado, last week I was at a stewardship conference, and the states are really starting to have concrete targets. This is what we need. This is what we need, concrete targets. So your experience says a lot, and I appreciate your holistic approach, and you've factored in the value system as well. You know, the federal government wants zero plastic waste by 2030. That's the objective. But once again, nothing that will come into effect before 2025. So there may be a change in government between now and then. So I know that you participated in Quebec to produce the guide on packaging. It's very practical. Could you please share your thoughts with us about the recommendations that were made? What can we do to improve things? We're the decision makers. You work out in the field. What should we know in order to change things, improve things, and not repeat past errors? Yes. First of all, 2030, when we need to ban all plastics, it doesn't really jive with the regulations in the provinces. And that's something that is very clear in Quebec regulations and in Ontario regulations. Plastic, in particular, will be treated based on 2020 and 2021. But by 2030, what are we going to be banning and why? How will the producer, the person selling the products, how are they going to be able to determine what the needs will be at that point? So there's things have to jive. You have a lot of doubt about the feasibility of this act. Yes, in terms of the deadline, yes, I would say so. The program begins January 1st.
Mr. Cannings, for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and thank all three of you for being here today. I am going to start with Mr. Taylor, because it's very nice to see and hear from you today from the Selkirk Tech Access Center. I've had the pleasure of touring there, and also toured through KC Recycling, which you mentioned. Right next to KC Recycling is Sirba Solutions, another big recycling center. Trail BC is a real center for recycling of all sorts. KC Recycling, as you mentioned, recycles primarily lead-acid batteries, so their main products are the polypropylene pellets you mentioned and the lead, which goes right into the Teck lead and zinc smelter in Trail. Sirba Solutions recycles every other kind of battery you can imagine, and both of them are one of the biggest of their kind in North America. The Teck smelter operations is now proposing a large EV battery recycling center to make it one of the biggest on the continent. So it's a very exciting sector in Trail and very exciting place to be for you. You're right in the center of all that. I'm just wondering, first of all, how do you sort of touched on some of those things, but how do you see your research there with the students, with the these various companies that are really at the cutting edge of recycling of not just plastic, but metals and battery materials, etc. How do you see yourself, your facility, really playing into that?
Well, to start with, my facility is too small. So we're looking at expansion or a new building for future opportunities. But we are always working with new or existing partners like Tech Metals or Mercer Celgar just up the highway in Castlegar, and of course other avenues of research. It always comes down to time, money, what opportunities we can involve students in before it just becomes too big or too much for our current capacity. But we're expanding. We're looking at new opportunities in 2025. And, you know, it's great to see some of the new grant opportunities through the plastic grant opportunities in BC it was called Clean BC Plastics, which is great for industry partners and ourselves alike. It just comes from key people, I think. If we can keep doing what we're doing, plus the team at LCIC and KC Recycling can keep supporting the educational opportunities, the research opportunities, and we can involve tech and other larger companies, but still keeping the small SMEs involved as well.
And I was going to ask you about other products. We've been talking about alternatives to plastic here as one of the solutions. You mentioned Mercer Celgar. It's a big pulp mill. Are there any initiatives going on there with new materials that might?
I believe they're still working on lignin as an opportunity. I know in this region, ABC 3D, Advanced Biocarbon 3D, was researching opportunities of extracting lignin from wood chips to create a biodegradable plastic. I haven't heard what their latest opportunities there are, but through the pulp and paper process, lignin is extracted and can be utilized as a biodegradable polymer. I'm not sure where they are at right now. Oftentimes, big industry gets really busy, and the opportunities for applied research is put on the shelf.
And just, you mentioned you were part of the a real network of technology access centers across the country. I don't know how connected you are with them in terms of what they're doing, but is there any other synergies in that network that would touch on plastic recycling, trying to solve this major issue we have?
Yep, absolutely. We, from the Tech Access Center network, we meet every 3 months, if not more. We really promote inter-TAC partnerships. So currently in other sectors and other areas, we're working with a TAC in Red Deer. Another one we work with all the time is in Camosun. There are only 3 TACs in BC, 30, I think, in Quebec, and almost equivalent to that in Ontario. So for us to partnership, it definitely is virtual rather than us visiting another TAC. But I know the TAC network definitely has other research areas in recycling composite materials. There's another one in waste recycling and recovery in water treatment, that area as well. But many other TACs have a subset of recycling or circular economy as part of their mandate.
Thank you.
So now we'll turn to our second round of questioning, and we'll kick that off, please, with MP Lobb for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. My first question is for Mark. Mark, if you look at all of the municipalities throughout the area and the different recycling companies, and some of what Marina was talking about there with the manufacturers and the companies and everything else, what is the percentage that actually gets recycled? Because some of these municipalities or recycling, in conjunction with the recycling companies, list off all the different things they won't recycle. Do you have a notice for that? Like, we're trying to educate, part of it is education, and you think you're doing the right thing, but they don't even accept it or they won't recycle it, and you think it should be.
Yeah, no, great question, and that's principally why we're moving to extended producer responsibility systems right across the country, and with BC in every way leading the way on extended producer responsibility for years, because there hasn't been that consistency in terms of how programs are run. What types of materials are accepted at your curbside. Making sure that industry that is making the products to be used is taking on the responsibility for managing that system. So within the next few years, as the whole country moves to extended producer responsibility, you're going to see a dramatic change in terms of the types of materials that can be accepted into those types of programs. And
a couple I have questions for you for.
Yes.
Plastic lawn furniture. I always make my trip to the local landfill, and it's littered with plastic furniture. When would we stop that practice, do you suppose? Or plastic toys? Like, do they recycle plastic? I don't think they recycle plastic toys.
So
either.
All of those things, in whatever format of plastic that you're looking at today, I would say that there are means to deal with that material. Typically, right now, through our mechanical recycling or our traditional recycling systems, it's your core material, so your number one plastics, your number twos, which have the greatest value. That's why they're being recycled and recovered the most. But even the other types of materials, or the harder to recycles, the flexibles, the films, there are solutions for managing that material. So that's the first point I would make. In terms of the material that's getting lost to our landfill, as I mentioned, an estimated 12 million imperial tons, U.S. tons, are finding their way into landfills, and that's because consumers at home, for whatever reason, if they have access to a program at their curbside, are inadvertently or on purpose putting it into the garbage stream, and it's ending up in our landfill. But there are absolutely solutions to recover and direct that material to reuse opportunities as recycled content and new packaging.
Sure. There's too much packaging as well. I think we could all agree with the junk that comes in the mail and everything else.
For sure.
The municipalities, okay, they shouldn't have to bear the responsibility for this, but are there municipalities that in their sewer or storm sewer systems are able to filter out the microplastics so they don't end in the creeks, rivers, and lakes and streams?
Yeah, so again, it's a combination of solutions that we need to adopt. And as I mentioned before, extended producer responsibility is going to be a significant change. And then in terms of other measures, as I mentioned before, the number one item that we pick up on our streets and on our beaches and our waterways is cigarette butts. I'm not sure how we're going to change that behavior of flicking your butts out the street, but we are working with companies and municipalities to install stormwater filtration systems called litter traps and gutter bins that can be easily removed, that catch this material when storm events happen, that wash this material down into a drain. But these are systems that allow us to educate people about what's happening. I'm not sure that that's every municipality can put a filter into a drain in their municipality. It just wouldn't be practical.
Yeah, fair enough. Jason Taylor, if you're still there, you sound like the recycling man, the guy with the ideas. What about these plastic furniture, children's toys that the grandparents buy that the kids don't need? On and on. Is there ways to recycle these into something useful, or is it a write-off and they go straight to the landfill?
In the U.S., I believe most plastic chairs is made out of polyethylene, and that polyethylene can definitely be it's a low temperature. I'm sure you maybe sat in one during the summer and it just squashed on you, but it doesn't take a lot of heat to melt that down and form it into another shape. I'm sorry I don't have the company's name, but this young fella from Castlegar moved to Canmore area in Alberta and set up this basically a way to heat up the plastic squash it down into sheet good with a fibrous material in between to basically make plastic paneling or plastic sheet goods. So the plastic is with us forever. How do we reuse it and recycle it into other longer term forms of use, rather than a plastic chair that lasts a few summers and then basically has degraded to the point just from UV exposure, and it then becomes brittle. But most of that plastic can be recycled or reutilized in different forms.
Thank you. We're well
I got
over
more
the time.
time yet, for sure.
No, you're a minute over.
Oh.
Actually, he went on a long time. So nice try. It was the witness that was a minute over. Sorry. So now we will turn to MP Longfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And really interesting conversation, and thank you to the witnesses for giving us your expertise. I want to start with Mr. Fisher on regulations. It was discussed earlier with Madame Pietrusel of the disconnect between provincial regulations and federal regulations. In the Great Lakes, we also have to worry about the United States. We have the Canadian Council of Environment Ministers that have agreed across Canada from the provincial ministries on getting to zero plastic waste by 2030. Regulations have to play a huge part in that. Could you maybe comment briefly on the role of international regulations as well as national regulations in achieving that goal?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's critical if we're going to really enable that systems change to transition from what they call a linear economy, where we take, make, and dispose materials, to a circular one, where we have the value of this material, the chemistry of the materials, circulating in the economy for as long as possible at their highest value. That is going to require significant systems change, and that is regulatory. One part regulatory, another part behavioral, and the third part is infrastructure. So on the regulatory side, to your point, the zero plastic waste strategy, which doesn't mean zero plastics, it means zero plastic waste. The CCME strategy that has been adopted by conservative and liberal premiers, and obviously this government, has really set a pathway, and that's why you're seeing extended producer responsibility be adopted right across the country. In Ontario, Quebec, BC's had it for a number of years. We're also starting to see extended producer responsibility at the state level in the U.S. There's a new U.S. bill that's been introduced into Congress. All of these things, when you put them together, they're more or less aligned, and that's going to create that that regulatory certainty that you're asking for in terms of labeling, targets around recycled content and products, and what have you.
So, and we are in an integrated market with the United States. So if Canada, for whatever reasons, decides that we don't need a regulatory system in Canada, how does that impact our relation with the businesses in the United States?
Well, as you know, there's a lot of materials, including, plastic resins and even recyclable materials that are moving back and forth across that border for either manufacturing or for recycling and final disposal. So we have to think about this as an integrated marketplace, particularly in the Great Lakes, because most of our trade and commerce is north-south. It's not across the country.
Right. Thank you. Well, it's great to have an imperative that the Great Lakes, as you said, is such a critical region in the world in terms of trade, and to have effective regulations on plastics, getting rid of the nanoplastics and the microplastics is critical in terms of regulation. I'd like to go over to Quebec to Madame Pietrusel, and thank you for your testimony. The regulation disconnects. Maybe that's, if you have information that you can provide the committee, so when we're doing our recommendations, that we make sure that we cover off these disconnects. Can you briefly mention one or two that are very important for us to be aware of?
Well, first of all, the dates, the deadlines for put in place different rates of recycling or valorization of the materials. The dates are not there to let people, producer, to have a better containers and packaging. Second, I would like to go back a little bit on legislation because we are talking about toys and, well, I'm speaking English for question.
You're doing great. I have very limited time, but please do continue. If there's regulations on toys.
See, regulation. There are not regulations on toys and chairs and things like that.
Right.
The products are long-term utilizations are not in our EPR program.
Thank you. Well, we will capture. You've got that. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
I do have a question for Mr. Taylor from Selkirk College. I think it's important for us to highlight the importance of colleges in the innovation ecosystem and making sure that colleges are included in any types of research funding that the federal government comes through with.
Absolutely. It's such an imperative thing, and it has been a great opportunity for us to incorporate that educational pathway for students as well. But the NSERC funding for tax is an example of something that could be in danger in the future.
Right, and we need to make sure it isn't, because you're providing our future green designers. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Now we'll turn to MP Blanchard-Joca for 2.5 minutes, please.
Si, Madame la Présidente, je vais poursuivre avec...
Thank you. I'd like to ask Mrs. Petrosel a question. It's very important that we coordinate regulations, particularly when it comes to banning plastics in 2030. You said that in 2025 there will be a schedule put out as to what is achievable and what isn't, and feasibility. I'll answer in part the question you had asked me before about what the federal government can do. It's to focus on innovation in terms of materials, in the sense of having materials that are recyclable and recycled, and looking at the equipment that we need in order to do this recycling, and having in each province local markets so that we can have a better economy. Not all materials can be part of the circulatory system, but we have to invest. If we don't invest, we won't have the necessary equipment or material. I will go back to your question. No, this 2025 schedule, the implementation of the new regulations as of January 1st, 2027 for selective recycling, and 2025, that doesn't give enough time to the producers. They won't be able to reach this rate of recyclability by then. And if they don't have enough time, because when you change design, packaging, materials, you can't do all of this in 3 months. You need at least a year to do this because you need research to be done. Another thing that the federal government can do is to help out with the research of materials, equipment. We have a lot of equipment that's very interesting. We have to invest further in these types of things. In each province, we have some facilities, but we won't be able to achieve this rate of recyclability.
Minutes. We'll turn to MP Cannings.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn to Mr. Fisher from the Council of Great Lakes Region. And you listed, I think, 6 areas that we had to really work on in your opening statement. I must admit I tried to write them down, but I fell behind quite quickly. And I'm just wondering, I don't remember you really talking too much about the reduce part of this, the solution, when we have to eliminate, much of the use of plastics over the next 5 or 6 years. A big part of that really has to come in reduction, and that means moving to different materials, whatever, or just simply not needing them. And I'm just wondering, how your work has tackled that part of the problem in the Great Lakes region. What kind of initiatives are there to help us reduce plastics in that, the heart of industrial North America?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think from our perspective, we advocate for reducing waste at source and looking at sort of packaging alternatives as part of the materials management hierarchy. Source reductions at the top. So we have to be talking about it. It's certainly not going to get you to a 50% recycling rate or a circular economy, but it is incredibly important. And we work alongside a number of the consumer packaging goods companies that are headquartered in the region, Procter & Gamble being in Cincinnati, Ohio, SC Johnson, Racine, Wisconsin, who are doing some tremendous innovations in their own packaging at that large-scale company size. But I just came back from a sustainable packaging conference today from Chicago, where there's 600 participants in the U.S., and I can tell you that there are lots of innovations happening that will allow that source reduction to happen, including looking at the bio-based materials, looking at materials like seaweed, for example, that can be almost has the same properties as flexible film. So the innovations are happening that are going to allow that source reduction to happen. But we also, I think just the final point I would make is we have to look at things on a life cycle basis. So I know when we look at different choices, it might seem obvious that, hey, this is better than plastics. But when you actually look at it from cradle to grave, so the GHG emissions or the use of water or the use of energy or how many times consumers actually use that alternative product, the environmental performance isn't always better, right? So I think whatever alternatives we have to look at, we have to look at it through the lens of cradle to grave life cycle and what are the better performing products that we could be pushing consumers to.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
What a nice positive note to end our study on, because you are the last witnesses for this recyclable plastic studies. So thank you, Mark Fisher, Jason Taylor, and Marina Petrosel for your testimonies and participation. Feel free to submit anything further in writing that you wish to add to be considered. So we will meet again on Tuesday. We will do drafting instructions for this study, and we'll start reviewing the first draft of our U15 study. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn?